Saving money is one of those tasks that is so much easier said than done. There's more to it than spending less money. Just how much money will you save? Where will you put it? And how can you make sure it stays there? Well, we do have in studio Mr. Manyara Kirago. He's a financial planning consultant. Thank you for coming to studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you find a lot of people earn, but they rarely save. Why? What happens?
One of the main problems with saving is that your wants and needs always tend to exceed the amount of money you're earning. And unless you actually take charge and control your expenditure, you will never be able to save. And you know, if you don't save, you really will not make progress in your finances.
So is it, I mean, it's that simple, that sometimes our wants and needs are just too much higher than our earnings can deal with?
Yes, and we have to take charge. Actually, the key is taking charge.
Taking charge.
Yes.
Okay, so how do you do that?
How do you do that? The first thing is to use one of those tools which everybody knows, but most people don't use, and that's the budget. In fact, most people don't even like that word budget, because it brings up pictures, conjures up pictures of being deprived or not having fun. But the truth is that it doesn't have to be like that, because that budget, it's you who writes it. So if you want fun, put fun in the budget. Okay,
here's the thing. How do you make up this budget? Because see, I'll draw up a list of the essential things I need. And then I'll be walking down the street, I'll find a cute pair of shoes, and I want to have it, So I mean, how do you come up with a proper budget that allows you also some money to play around with, and how do you stick to that budget?
Okay, the first thing you need to do is, first of all, write down your current expenditure. Without trying to change the way you're spending money, just write it down for about a month. I know it's a very irritating exercise, but it's very eye-opening. Because you'll find that there's some things you spend money on and which really they add no value to your life. So once you do that, now it's time to decide where do you start cutting down until now things are within your control. Then in that, once you've got that, now start to make those decisions. What am I going to cut down? Is this expenditure of this item okay? And then within that budget, you have some money for that. Those expenses which you maybe some fun in your life.
Trouble is, some of us do make that budget. For instance, I know I do, but sticking to that budget sometimes is a bit difficult.
Yes, it is difficult, but you must realize on the other hand, without discipline, discipline is a price you have to pay for financial progress. And remember, there's one rule in personal finance which states that you must spend less than you earn. In fact, it's a cardinal rule of personal finance.
Spend less than you earn.
You must spend less than you earn. Too many of us spend more than we earn, and then we take care of the difference with debts. So we keep on increasing our debts. And one of the problems is that what you've just mentioned, that impulse buying things you never planned to buy. I've never ever said that you should not buy yourself nice things. What I always say is that you should make a decision, a well thought out decision to buy those things. So if you want that nice shoe, put it in a budget.
Oh, so it has to be in the budget?
Oh, absolutely.
So everything then is confined to in the budget, nothing out of the budget?
Well, just like a diet. If you make a diet too strict, you'll soon end up busting it. So it should not be strict to the last cent. But you should control most of your expenditure.
Okay, so then I do want to save and I have my earnings and I know this is the much I earn. How do I reach to the conclusion that this is how much I should earn? I mean, how much is enough?
How much is enough?
Yes.
It's never enough. In fact, Henry Ford said one thing: no matter how much you earn, you'll always need this much more.
So how do you get to a conclusion that I need to save, say, maybe a third of my salary?
Your savings should be driven by your goals, because you need to set goals. What do you want to do with your life? Is it that you are planning to buy a house in the near future? Are you planning to take your children to college sometime, if you do have kids? And eventually everybody has to stop working. So you have to prepare for that. You need to look into the future and prepare. Don't just wait for things to happen to you. Be proactive. Plan for what the things you're going to need, not just this year, but 5 years from now, 10 years, even 20.
But now that you've mentioned that, say I want to buy a house. I mean, there are people who really get very ambitious. Can you overstretch yourself? Is there such a thing as overstretching yourself? Save too much until you really spread out thin.
It is possible. In fact, one of the things I always say about the goals you set for yourself, you must make sure they are attainable with your current income. Life is about balance. Whenever we talk about having a budget and saving money, it does not mean that you don't enjoy yourself. It does not mean that you don't treat yourself. It does not mean that you become a mean person to everybody around you. Not necessarily so. All it means is you make well thought out decisions, and if you're setting a goal, like for instance, I want to buy a house. If a house of 2 million shillings is too expensive for me, setting a goal like that would be a mistake. So I would set a goal which I can afford with my current income. So those are some of the things. That's just the one thing I mentioned about how to save, have the budget, and avoid impulse purchases. But there are several other things we need to do.
Take us through them.
Okay. The other one is control your debts. Too many of us keep on buying things with borrowed money. It's very tempting because banks are willing to dish out money. Credit cards are always available. And for some people, the Shylocks are there. But whenever you're paying a debt like that, you're also paying interest, which increases your expenditure. The more interest you're paying, the less money you have available to save. So you should minimize the amount of debt you're taking on. And the kind of debt you're taking on is also very important. If you're borrowing for current expenditure, or borrowing for depreciating assets, like for instance furniture, or you're borrowing to do a wedding, such things, those are not good debts, those are bad debts. But if you're borrowing for a house, for instance, or borrowing to put it to work in a viable business, or borrowing to do a course which will increase the ability to earn, then you're on the right track.
Define what is a good debt.
Those are the good debts, the last three I said. Good debt.
So what makes a good debt? How do you define a good debt?
A good debt is when you're borrowing money either to buy an appreciating asset, like for instance that home, borrowing to take a course which will increase your ability to earn, or borrowing to put that other money to work in a viable business. Those are good debts.
Question. I've had some people say that it's okay to have debts. You cannot do without debts. Is that true? Can you really live without debts or not?
It is possible, but it may limit your ability to get ahead. For instance, very few people can avoid borrowing to buy a house. So it's not absolutely necessary to be without debts, but make sure the debts which you take on are good debts.
Okay, so we have to control our debts. What's the other factor?
The other one is, too many of us complain that we're paying too much income tax. And yet, there are ways in which we can actually minimize the amount of income tax you're paying. For instance, if you're a member of a pension scheme at your place of work, you usually contribute some money to it. Most people contribute between 5 to 10%. Now, the law allows up to 20,000 shillings or 30% of your income to be contributed to that. And that money is deducted from your gross pay before tax is calculated. So if currently you're contributing only 5,000 shillings, if you voluntarily decide to increase your contribution, you can ask your employer, deduct me more. Of course, you have to be sure that you can survive on the lower take-home pay. If you do that, you'll find that your taxable pay goes down and your tax goes down. Now that's only one way of reducing your taxes. There is another one. If you're planning to buy a home, a house maybe in 3, 4, 5 years.
Wait a minute, isn't that fraud?
No. It's in the laws.
It's in the law.
Absolutely, that's tax avoidance.
Okay.
Legal.
Yeah.
And it's actually written in the laws to encourage people to prepare better for their retirement. Here's another one. If you want to buy a house, you can actually save some part of the money towards a house in a registered home ownership savings scheme. 4,000 shillings per month is the maximum. That money is also deducted from your tax, from your income before tax is calculated. Once again, your taxes go down. Not only that, when it's in that account, it earns interest, which is tax-free. So that's another easier way. It makes it easier for somebody to end up with a house. Once again, your taxes are down. Another way, if you're buying a house, if you're paying for a mortgage with a registered mortgage provider, you're entitled to claim income tax relief on the mortgage interest. And it's up to 150,000 shillings a year, so that's a lot of money. So, especially those people who avoid mortgages because they think that they pay too much tax, they should think about that. And those are not the only ways. There's yet one more. If you're paying life insurance premium for a policy whose maturity is 9 years or longer, you can claim up to 15% of the premium as relief on your taxes. So you see, you actually have some leeway in the amount of tax you're paying. And with the less tax you're paying, obviously, the more money you have available for your investments.
Of course.
So that's just another. There are quite a few things you can do to reduce your expense. The other one is avoid get-rich-quick schemes. Whenever pyramid schemes start up, people rush to put their money in there. And when they lose that money, it's no longer available to them. But if you avoided that, that could have been money which would have worked in more established investments for your future. So there are quite a few ways in which, and none of them involve not having fun.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then once now you decide to do saving, of course you've taken us through, the budgets and avoiding debts and all of that. So now I'm very keen on saving. Where do I save? Do I do it in a bank? Do I go to the NSC? Do I save in a piggy bank?
Good question. Now that really depends on what you're saving for. Remember I had said you should have goals. Your investments should be oriented towards your goals. So if you're saving, for instance, for a house, the first place I would recommend that you go is that home ownership savings schemes, so as to take that tax advantage first. And then any other money you're going to be saving towards that house, if you're going to save, for instance, over 5 years, I would advise you maybe to go to a unit trust, maybe an equity or balance fund, and accumulate money there. So come 5 years later, you liquidate the unit trust and also the home ownership savings scheme, put the money together, and you achieve your goal. If you're saving money for your child's next year's school fees, the bank is good enough for that. So you need to accumulate that. Say if your child's school fees is 36,000 shillings, for instance, divide that by 12, that's 3,000 shillings. Go and put a standing order so that every month 3,000 shillings is put aside. Then come next year, January, you'll be having the school fees. Don't make the mistake that many parents do. They just sit around, enjoy their life until January comes around. They don't have the money for school fees, especially after Christmas festivities. And then they rush to the cooperative society for school fees loans. Now, when you do it like that...
That's not a good loan?
No, it's not a good loan. It's not a good loan because you are paying for current expenditure. And now, when you do it like that, you're paying school fees. On top of that, you're paying interest. So you're making it more difficult for yourself. If it was something like higher education, which is extremely expensive, the cooperative loan could be a good loan. But for the primary school, secondary school education...
It's a bad debt.
Yeah, accumulate that money so that come January, you have it. So it depends on what you're saving for. If it's a short-term one, the more you should tend towards the bank. If it's a longer term, then you can tend towards the financial markets.
What's the problem with saving with piggy banks? Because I know of some people who save in piggy banks, by the way.
Okay, it depends again. If you're saving for next week's sukuma, piggy bank is fine.
I mean, you see, the way of reasoning is very simple. I could put my money in the bank and still go there and withdraw, and I could still, chip a bit into my piggy bank if I want. So really, it doesn't make any difference.
It's true, but the disadvantage of putting money in a bank and also in the piggy bank is that there is one hidden enemy to money which is saved like that, and that is inflation. Inflation is if inflation is at 12%, for instance, and you're earning 3% on your bank account, that means you're losing at a rate of 9%. If you're putting it in a piggy bank, then of course you're losing at the rate of 12%. So that's why you should not put in a piggy bank money which you're going to have there for a long time. But
okay.
If it's a short term, it's fine.
Okay, we have a caller. Hello.
Hello.
How are you? Give us your name.
I'm Kimari.
Yes, Kimari. How was your weekend?
It was terrific.
Great. Go ahead.
Now, first of all, I'd like to say that Mr. Manyara Kirago, you are one of the reasons why I buy Saturday Nation, so that I can get that pull out and have some advices. Now, one thing is that I've always been reading your articles, And okay, they are good. I actually quite agree with each and everything that you say. But now following them, making sure that I'm at par with what you're saying is quite difficult. True, you said that it needs discipline, but now that's one thing. Now my question is this. Can you please advise us about mortgage versus buying a house? Should I go through the mortgage way or should I save so that I can buy a house? Well, it's mortgage, I can have it at quite earlier time than saving. So what will you advise me? Should I go and mortgage it or buy it, save that I can buy? I need your answer, please.
Thanks, Kimari. Thank you.
That is a question which so many people are troubled by, because too many people think that the mortgage, first of all, it's a long-term commitment. Not only that, when they calculate how much they end up paying back as compared to the price of the house, they find that they pay a lot more back. And then a lot of people are also scared that what if I commit to a mortgage and I lose my job a few years down the line? Now, first of all, a house is a very important asset for any individual. In fact, one of the most important personal assets most people have. But although it is important, it is also very expensive. So it is very difficult for somebody to save up and buy a house because it will take you so long. And not only that, as you're saving and investing for that house, you're still paying rent and the prices of the houses are still going up. So it will be very difficult for you to achieve that. The mortgage, on the other hand, what you need to do is save up the deposit, and then once you pay the deposit, the balance is financed over a period of 15 years. Now, those issues which I talked about total interest being too much, and also about long commitment, and also fear of losing a job, those ones can be answered in this way. First of all, compared with somebody who's renting, the mortgage owner, or the person who buys a house on the mortgage, eventually finishes the mortgage. When will the person who's paying rent finish their rent? In fact, by the time the person who's buying the house finishing paying for the mortgage, the rent will be much higher because it's an ever-increasing expense, which leaves you with nothing to show. As regards the total amount of interest, the home, if you bought it in the right place, if you bought it in a place, in a good place, then probably it will be appreciating. And most likely, by the time you finish paying that mortgage, the value of that house will be a lot more than the price plus the interest, and it will continue appreciating over the years. Then the other one, about the fear of losing a job. Compared with somebody who's renting, the person who has a mortgage is in a much better situation. Why is this? It is like this because when you're paying for a mortgage, you're actually becoming richer every month. You're becoming richer every month because the house, the value is going up. In addition to that, your debt, the mortgage, is going down. So you're increasing your equity in that house. Now, should you have run this mortgage maybe for 5, 6, 7 years and then you lose your job, you have got options. One of the options is you can decide to sell the house. There's a big misconception, and a lot of people hold that the house belongs to the mortgage company. It does not.
It's not like a car where you cannot get the logbook until you finish paying it off.
The house is yours. Even the title deed is in your name. The only thing is charged to the mortgage company because you owe them money. So you can decide to sell the house and then you'll sell it at market rate. The mortgage company will take their money. Depending on the terms of the agreement or the charge document, they may charge you a penalty or they may not. And so you sell the house at the appreciated price. The value of the loan, the balance of the loan they'll take away, so you'll have some money left. So you're a lot better off than the tenant who, when they lose their job, they've got nothing. Sure for that. So about the interest, total interest, so long as you're not paying above market rates, there is no big problem. About the losing a job, you're better off than a tenant.
Okay. Here's the thing. You said you save up for the initial deposit. But then again, people have so many commitments nowadays. So how do you restrict yourself from depleting those savings?
The only way you can manage to be disciplined in saving, and like Mr. Kibari said, following the advice is sometimes difficult, especially if you decide to follow piecemeal. There are a number of things you need to do. First of all, before you begin to invest those long-term investments, you must have money for emergencies. Because if you don't have money for emergencies put somewhere aside, whenever an emergency crops up, and you know, no matter how well you plan your life, unexpected things will happen. So if you don't have money that you can go and access for an emergency, you will be forced to go and deplete those savings for the house.
So what do you do? Do you do like double saving? So I save a little money for emergencies and then my official savings.
Now you're getting closer. You save money for each of your goals, and your emergency funds should be one of the goals. So you'll be saving money for the emergency, you'll be saving money for the house. If you've got kids, you'll be saving money for the children's higher education. So you've got many different targets.
The emergency fund should be part of my budget.
Yes, it should be the money you're putting towards the emergency fund will be in your budget. The money you're putting towards your house will be in your budget. The money you're putting towards the children's education will be in your budget. So you notice there's so many of them. So that means that you really have to watch your spending, which is another thing. Too many of us are unable to save because we don't even watch how we spend our money. We don't track our expenditure. Have you ever woken up one Monday morning and you check in your purse, you say, oops,
I have nothing.
And on Friday I had
500 bob.
Yes. If that happens to you, and it happens to many people, it means that you really don't know where exactly your money is going. And if you don't know where it's going, how can you stop it from going there?
You're wasting a lot.
Yes. So once you begin to track, then you'll be able to actually find where the money was disappearing. Then you'll be able to save for these goals.
Okay.
And once you have the emergency fund, in addition to that, you make sure you have medical insurance, you have life insurance, and once you do those things, and also you reduce your debts, you'll find that staying on track with your savings, it's not as difficult. And another very important one, pay yourself first.
We get back to that after we pick this call. Hello?
Hello.
How are you? Give us your name.
My name's John.
Yes, John. Just be a little bit loud, please.
Yeah, I would like to thank Kirago for getting the time to come and share with us about our personal finances. I would like to ask about for him to advise us about the home savings schemes and the unit trust. I'm a little bit skeptical of the many financial institutions that we have in Kenya, because people will come set up a financial institution, after which they'll run away with your money. If you could kindly give us maybe some names of trustworthy things that cannot really liquidate within a very short time.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.
Hello?
Hello? I'm asking.
Yes.
Supposing I've saved.
Yes.
I've saved in unit trust, and I've also saved in unit link, and I've also saved in stock market. I was asking, is that duplication of saving? Again, another question is, if you take a loan to buy shares, is it a bad loan?
Thank you. You didn't tell us your name?
Nyambura.
Nyambura, thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay, let's first start with John's question.
Yes.
Trustworthy financial institutions. How do you know them? How do you know the ones that will liquidate?
The important thing, first of all, is to only deal with companies and institutions which are registered with the government and are regulated by the government. Now, when it comes to the home ownership savings scheme, this is something which is put in the tax laws. It's allowed for in the tax laws, and there are not very many of these right at the moment. If I can name names, there are some. Housing Finance has a home ownership savings scheme, which is part of a product which they dub First Hope. Then Insurance Company of East Africa, they have a home ownership savings scheme. And Kenyan Alliance Insurance Company, they also have a home ownership savings scheme. Now, when you deal with organizations like those, then you have quite you are assured to a large extent that your money is quite safe. So he asked about the unit the unit trust. The unit trust again is the same kind of approach. Deal with only companies which are regulated by the government and the Capital Markets Authority. People tend to wonder, how do I know that my money is safe in a unit trust? The way the unit trust market is structured is that the unit trust company itself is owned by the investors. So when you're buying shares, when you're putting your money in the unit trust, you're actually buying shares of the unit trust. Now there are trustees who now take care of the interests of the shareholders, of the investors. Then the fund manager is the one who is appointed by the trustees, and that's the organization or the institution which manages the fund, the unit trust. But they're not the ones who are holding the assets of the investors of the unit trust. The assets are kept by yet another organization or another institution called the custodian. So should anything happen, then the fund manager is no longer there. The assets are still there with the custodian to be distributed to the investors. Should anything happen to the custodian, the assets are still available because they are not assets of the custodian, they're just being held in trust. So they're still available. So that way you're protected from failure of this organization, these institutions, but you're not protected from market forces. If the stock market goes down and you have a fund which has got stocks in it, then your account balance will go down. If it goes up, and it will go up.
You're rich.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Nyambura's question. If you take a loan to invest in the NSE, is that a bad debt or a good debt?
First of all, we must remember that investing in stock market is a long-term affair. Next thing, investing in IPOs like Kenyans love to do. In fact, for most Kenyans, it's like the stock market is only open during the IPOs. It's higher risk, it's more speculative. Borrowing money to put in the IPO is highly speculative. The best thing to do is invest your savings. Period.
You're safer with your savings?
Yes.
Okay, and actually, that brings me to my next question. How do you make your savings work for you? Because you'll hear people say, okay, I've put it in a bank account, but the interest rate is just so low, there's nothing, How do you make your savings work?
You make your savings work by investing in places which earn a better higher return than inflation. Just like you've mentioned, if you put in the bank, you'll be earning 3-4% if you're lucky. But inflation is much higher than that. So you actually lose, in terms of purchasing power, you're actually losing. So you invest in places which earn you better return. Now, that will only be possible for savings which are going to be longer term, because if you're needing this money in next year, it is not right to put it in the stock market, because the stock market is a long-term investment. If you do put it in the stock market, which is a mistake which a lot of us make, especially with the IPOs. In fact, most people during the IPOs, their plan is this: I will buy these shares, immediately they go on market, I will sell them. Unfortunately, so is the plan of 95% of the rest of the buyers. So when everybody wants to sell, who's there to buy? Money which you put in the stock market should be longer term money. Money you're not going to need in the next few years. So by that I mean you should have put the money aside for your emergencies, money aside for your next year's school fees and such things. But if you're going to buy a house in 5 years or start a business in 5 years, or for your part of your retirement money, you can be putting in those longer term investments.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to say something?
So the unit trust is the stock market is one place which you can either access by going direct and buying the stocks yourself. But buying the stocks yourself, it's a difficult proposition for many individuals. It's difficult because being able to evaluate whether a stock is a good investment or not is a technical exercise. And most people are not qualified. Most people are not equipped to actually determine whether it's a good investment or not. In addition to that, most people do not have enough money to diversify, to buy many stocks of many companies. And then those are the two major impediments for people, an individual buying direct. You could actually, instead of trying to analyze it yourself, you could go to a professional. You could go to an investment advisor. But and for many people, they don't have enough money to attract the services of an investment advisor, because he probably asks for a minimum account balance of $500,000 or $1 million. So for most people, that's a far-off dream. So the the most appropriate or most practical way for many individuals to access the stock market is through the unit trust. That way, when you give money to a unit trust company, they have employed investment analysts whose job it is to determine whether this is a good, or to make the judgment whether this stock is a good investment or not, or this one. So and they also have a lot of money because they collect money from many people. So they are widely diversified. So you as an individual, you do not need a lot of money. On top of that, you do not need to have those stock analysis skills, and yet you get the appropriate investment return according to the fund which you've gone for.
Okay, we have another caller. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you.
Your name, please?
I'm Joseph.
Yes, Joseph.
I'm calling from Meru.
Yes.
I wanted to ask. Can I authorize my employer to increase my pension scheme? Mimi ni mwalimu TSC na nilikuwa nauliza TSC kama naweza authorize to increase my pension scheme.
Okay, Joseph, thank you. Can he do that?
Now the teachers service in the teachers service commission, I don't know whether the scheme, the pension scheme, is a contributory one. If it is, it's under the RBA, then it is possible to increase. I understand for many civil servants, before they used to have a non-contributory scheme, so in that case you would not be able to. But then if you have a non-contributory one, then you can start your own individual retirement scheme with a fund manager, for instance, an insurance company. So if they do have a contributory one, then it is possible for him to ask his employer to increase. Now, whether in practice they will actually implement it, that's another question, because they must have the ability to actually implement it. Okay. But according to the law, he is supposed to be allowed to.
Okay. Before we talked to some callers before, you were talking about paying yourself. What does that mean? What is that?
Whenever you get your salary, and I'm sure you have yours right now.
That's why I called you in here. I need some advice.
Okay. Whenever one receives their salary, they usually go and pay their rent. Then they go and do the shopping, they pay their bills, and then they go and entertain themselves, maybe a bit, a lot.
And pay some debts.
And then for most people, the money runs out pretty fast. In fact, for many people, before the 10th of the month, there is no money. Then the question to ask yourself is that all that money you paid the landlord, the shops, the power and lighting company, all the money you've paid out, will you ever see it again? Will you ever?
No.
Absolutely not. It's gone, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was truly not your money. It was for those people, your landlord and all. The only money which is truly yours is the one you're saving for your retirement, for your house, and for your kids' future. Now, that is what you should remove from your salary before you pay these other people. Remove money for your house savings, money for your children's savings, and so on. And you do this by simply putting bank standing orders or salary checkoffs. I always say that one of the reasons the cooperative is so successful is because they implement that pay yourself first. Just think about it. Most cooperatives, all cooperatives actually, cooperative societies, the contributions of the members are taken before the members see the salaries. Imagine if they were to change that and say that everybody should receive the salary, and then on 15th, bring your contributions. How much will they get? Pay yourself first is a very important key to being able to save. And the amazing thing is, once you get used to it, it becomes so easy. And then you'll begin wondering, how come I was not saving before?
Okay, here's something, Mr. Manyara. The cost of living is increasing by the day, and people are constantly complaining. And then I need to do my savings. How do I strike a balance between keeping my savings constant and also coping with the increasing cost of living?
There is no denying it. Times are hard. There is also no denying it. Too many of us buy things without even realizing we're buying them. So the first thing is to make sure that you're aware of how you're spending. Too many of us just walking into Java, you don't even think twice about it, and yet we end up leaving 300 shillings there. So the only thing is to have a higher level of consciousness about how you're spending. It does not mean that you necessarily have to suffer, but it just means that you're thinking about your spending. Once you do that, then you'll find that you actually have a bit more to save. But as times get harder, your savings, you may be forced to reduce your savings. But so long as you're aware about your spending, I don't think it'll be totally impossible to save. Because I've seen people with very low income. In fact, one of the examples I always give in the training, we do a lot of training for employees to teach them how to manage the money so that their employers benefit. Because if your employees are always having financial problems, then they will be bringing them to work. So we do a lot of training to help employees learn this. So there is this example I always give about this person who many years ago was born in a poor family. He didn't have any education at all, or he had barely for education. So obviously with that kind of education, he could not get a job. So he started working in the farms. A farm laborer earns very little, as you know. But out of that little money, he forced himself to save. After some years, he had saved enough to buy a bicycle. But he knew what he was doing, he had a plan. It was not for fun. With that bicycle, he started buying tripe, matumbo, from the slaughterhouse, loading on the bicycle and going to sell to the butcheries. His income went up slightly, but he continued to save. After some years, he had opened a small butchery. His income went up again, continued to save. And he went on like that throughout his life, always saving part of what he earned. By the time he passed away, I think it's about 20 years now, this person was a billionaire. And there's so many stories like that.
Oh, that's true story.
True story, right here in Kenya. And there's so many of them. So if this person who was a farm laborer could be able to save, I can assure you that saving is not impossible.
Amen. That's what I can say. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much. And thank you for those tips. I really did benefit. I hope you did as well. We had in studio today Mr. Manyara Kirago. He's a financial planning consultant. Today it was just about you and your money and how do you manage your savings. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Penina Karibe. Have a great day. And remember the tips. Oh,